Picture this, it's the mid-1700s. A group of colonies that stretch along the eastern coast of a vast continent are growing restless. They are, for all intents and purposes, thriving. But there's one problem: they're ruled by a king over 3,000 miles away. A king they've never met. A king whose taxes, laws, and decisions seem to have little regard for their needs or desires. And so, in a world ruled by monarchs, a small group of colonists dared to dream of something different. They dreamed of freedom, of self-governance, of standing up against an empire that seemed unshakable. This dream? It was the American Revolution. Today, we're going to take you through the entire history of the American Revolution, from the first spark of rebellion to the final victory that changed the world. So, grab a seat, get comfortable, and let's travel back in time to when the fate of a new nation was written in the ink of revolution.
It all began in the 1600s when European nations like England, France, and Spain sent settlers to North America. The English colonies, about 13 of them, began to grow. They were diverse, with different economies, cultures, and geographies. Some were focused on farming, others on trade, but all were part of a larger empire, the British Empire. It all began in the 1600s when European nations like England, France, and Spain sent settlers to North America. The English colonies, about 13 of them, began to grow. They were diverse, with different economies, cultures, and geographies. Some were focused on farming, others on trade, but all were part of a In the mid-1700s, Britain was broke. The 7 Years' War had drained the nation's resources. So what did they do? They turned to their American colonies for help. The Stamp Act of 1765 was the first major tax, followed by the Townshend Acts in 1767, and later the Tea Act of 1773. Imagine paying taxes on paper, tea, and even glass, all while you have no voice in Parliament. You'd be frustrated too, right? Now, the colonists didn't just sit back and accept these taxes. No, they began to organize, to protest. They adopted the slogan, "No taxation without representation." And these protests? Well, they got louder and more intense. The Boston Massacre in 1770, where British soldiers killed 5 colonists during a confrontation, was the breaking point for many. The gloves were off, and tensions were boiling over. In 1773, things took a turn for the worse. The British government passed the Tea Act, which gave the British East India Company a monopoly on tea, angering colonial merchants. That was when the infamous Boston Tea Party took place. In December, a group of colonists, disguised as Native Americans, boarded British ships and dumped 342 chests of tea into the harbor, a bold act of defiance. Britain's response was swift. They implemented the Coercive Acts, also known as the Intolerable Acts. These laws were meant to punish the colonies, closing the port of Boston, restricting town meetings, and even giving British soldiers the right to stay in colonists' homes. The colonists now saw the empire not as a protector, but as an enemy. In 1774, the colonies responded by convening the First Continental Congress. Leaders like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin began to discuss how they might resist British rule peacefully at first, but they knew what was at stake. These were the men who were beginning to understand that the only way to secure their rights might be through war. April 19, 1775. It was early morning in Lexington, Massachusetts. The British Army was on its way to seize colonial weapons and arrest leaders of the rebellion, but the colonists were ready. In the town of Lexington, the first shots were fired. No one knows exactly who fired them, but they changed everything. The shot heard round the world had been fired. The American Revolution had begun. Within days, battles erupted across New England, at Concord, at Bunker Hill. Colonists, both farmers and soldiers, rallied together, realizing that what they were fighting for wasn't just about taxes anymore. It was about liberty, the desire to govern themselves. In June 1775, the Continental Congress appointed George Washington as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. Washington, who had led colonial militias during the French and Indian War, was now tasked with uniting a ragtag group of rebels into an army that could stand against the most powerful military in the world. Despite early losses, the Continental Army was growing stronger, and the revolution was spreading. The British, under King George III, underestimated the colonists. They believed that one decisive victory would squash the rebellion. But the Americans, fighting for their homes, their families, and their freedom, were relentless. On July 4, 1776, the Second Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, written primarily by Thomas Jefferson. It was a bold statement that the American colonies were now free and independent states, no longer subjects to a British monarch. The Revolution, now more than just a rebellion, was a fight for an idea that all men are created equal and have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The winter of 1777 to 1778 was brutal, with Washington's army suffering through hardships at Valley Forge. Yet, this time also marked a turning point. Foreign allies began to take notice. France, eager to weaken Britain, stepped in with crucial military support. France's intervention was a game changer. One of the major turning points of the war came in 1777, at the Battle of Saratoga. The American victory here convinced the French that the revolution could actually succeed. Soon, French soldiers, naval support, and supplies began to pour into the colonies, tipping the balance of power in favor of the rebels. In 1781, the final decisive battle was fought at Yorktown, Virginia. British General Cornwallis, surrounded by American and French forces, had no choice but to surrender. The American Revolution was won. The victory at Yorktown didn't mean an immediate end to the struggle. Negotiations for peace were long and difficult, but in 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed, officially recognizing the United States as an independent nation. But victory brought new challenges. The newly formed United States had to create a government from scratch, which led to the drafting of the Constitution in 1787, and the Bill of Rights in 1791. It was a nation built on ideals, freedom, equality, and democracy, but those ideals would be tested again and again. The American Revolution didn't just change the course of history for the United States, it changed the world. It inspired revolutions across the globe, showing that people, when united in the cause of liberty, could challenge even the most powerful empires. And so, the American Revolution, a story of resilience, courage, and the pursuit of liberty, remains one of the most significant chapters in human history. It's a reminder that revolutions begin with a single idea, but they end up changing everything. Thanks for watching.